Sohee prepares herself in front of the mirror, trying to look flawless, as if the outward gloss could hide the anxiety and weariness of a marriage that has long since become a duty for her. Family conversations and persistent hints about an heir come back to her mind, reminding her that in this union, they are not expecting feelings from her, but results. Sohee and Jihoon's marriage appears to the public as the perfect union of two influential families, but behind closed doors, it is filled with silence, distance, and indifference. They live in the same building, but rarely see each other, maintaining the appearance of closeness only at official events and rare public outings. Under pressure from promises and circumstances, Soki decides to take a step she had been putting off for a long time, realizing that there is nowhere left to retreat. Her attempt to get closer is difficult and awkward, because there has long been no familiar warmth between her and Jihoon, only tense anticipation. Jihoon accepts her move with restraint and coldness, as if agreeing out of necessity rather than desire, which makes the moment especially painful. Their closeness turns out to be unusual and devoid of tenderness, but for Soka, it becomes a symbol of hope and an attempt to change fate. She convinces herself that even such a step could be the beginning of change, and that with time, Jihoon will be able to change. After that night, Sohee lives in anticipation, clinging to the thought that her determination was not in vain. As time passes, hope begins to crack when expectations fail to produce the desired results. Disappointment gives way to anxiety, but Sohee tries to hold on, convincing herself that there is still a chance. An unexpected message shatters her fragile balance when a photo of Jihoon with another woman appears on her phone screen. Shock and fear give way to doubt, and Sohee refuses to believe the obvious, hoping for a mistake or misunderstanding. She decides to meet the woman in the photograph, to hear the truth directly, and not drown in guesses. During the conversation, it becomes clear that there is a long-standing emotional connection between the woman and Jihoon. The rival justifies her feelings with years of acquaintance and the confidence that she understands Jihoon better than anyone. Sohee realizes that her marriage has long been perceived by those around her as an empty formality and a successful picture. The words about the showcase couple hurt the most, completely destroying the illusions she had been holding on to. Soka's attempt to fix everything only revealed a reality that could no longer be ignored. The girl closes herself off, feeling others' gazes on her, and a conversation with Hyven reveals the painful topic of obsessive love and the fear of repeating her mother's fate. The mother's story emerges as a shadow, filled with painful attachment, sacrifice, and an attempt to hold on to love, even at the cost of her own disappearance. These memories keep coming back in nightmares, and the harder Sohee tries to get rid of them, the deeper they become embedded in her consciousness. She convinces herself that she is not like her mother, that her feelings and actions are different, and that fear should not be confused with love. Leaving the cafe, Sohee puts the tense conversation behind her and steps outside, where the wind and snow momentarily stop her in the middle of the city. The snowflakes seem almost unrealistically beautiful, but even this moment of silence cannot drown out the thoughts that follow. Jihoon's words, spoken once in passing, came to mind, but became an unexpected consolation for her on the darkest nights. These words did not promise salvation, but they allowed me to breathe, giving me hope that the pain did not have to disappear immediately for life to go on. The girl wonders what she expected from marriage and from Jihoon, and whether her persistence was a reflection of the very obsession she feared. She decides that she must let go, even if that decision is more frightening than the unknown. On her way to the office, Sohee takes the elevator, feeling a fatigue that can no longer be hidden behind an outward calm. Jihoon's office door. The conversation begins with cold politeness, but the tension between them quickly becomes palpable. Soki, overcoming her fear, voices her decision to divorce, and a heavy silence hangs between them. After that moment, everything seems distant and unreal, as if the world continues to move on, oblivious to her internal fracture. As time passes, Sohee changes her appearance, as if trying to capture the changes not only inside, but also outside. A call from the chairman makes her remember the past and the care he showed during the most difficult period of her life. Memories take her back to the day of her father's funeral, when the chairman took on his debts and expenses, becoming her support in utter despair. It was then that the proposal to meet her grandson was made, which became the beginning of a marriage that determined her future destiny. Now, heading to the chairman's house, So-hee realizes that she must tell him the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. The house has a warm atmosphere, and the caring scene between the chairman and Hye-won reminds So-hee of the family she always dreamed of. Against the backdrop of this almost domestic idol, she feels how reality becomes even more painful. So-hee and Ji-hoon's paths draw closer again, promising an inevitable clash. Ji-hoon drives with a personal driver, automatically refusing to report. But inside, he can't shake off So-hee's words about divorce, which flash in his memory again and again. At the chairman's house, the situation thickens as Haewon's conversations and hints make So-hee feel left out and on guard. So-hee notices the change in Haewon's appearance and realizes that she is still drawn to Ji-hoon, ignoring previous warnings and boundaries. The chairman expresses disappointment, not understanding why he cannot get to know the man he considers almost a member of the family. So he seizes the moment to leave, hoping to speak with the chairman alone later and tell him the truth about the divorce. Haewon suddenly decides to see the girl off, depriving her of the opportunity to say the most important thing and leaving an unpleasant feeling of a missed opportunity. On the way, So he learns that Ji-hoon told Haewon about the divorce, which causes shock, anxiety, and an avalanche of questions. Returning home, she locks herself in the apartment, letting panic wash over her as her thoughts become confused and her heart pounds. The memory of the photograph with another woman intensifies the pain and makes So-hee see in herself a frightening resemblance to her mother. She is overcome with trembling and self-loathing, as if her mother's past is standing behind her and not allowing her to breathe. A call from the secretary takes her by surprise, and she learns that he is at her house on the orders of the vice chairman. Opening the door, So-hee is confronted by Ji-hoon, who appears drunk and unusually close. His behavior confuses her, breaking the usual distance and making her heart beat faster. So-hee, overcoming her confusion, decides to take responsibility and sends the secretary home. Left alone, she sees Ji-hoon sleeping and for the first time in a long time, looks at him without defense and anger. She carefully corrects him, feeling how the old feelings rise up against his will. So-hee decides to distance herself and spend the night apart, realizing that her decision to get a divorce cannot be made to disappear due to weakness. But Ji-hoon, waking up, does not allow her to leave, and a painful emotional contact flares up between them. There is confusion and fear of rejection in his words and tears that So-hee has never seen before. She hesitates, not understanding where the line lies between pity, love, and self-deception. Their closeness becomes inevitable, filled with tension, doubts, and long-suppressed feelings. Night blurs the clear lines between decision and desire, leaving the morning with consequences that can no longer be escaped. Soon, everything ends quietly, and without further ado, Ji-hoon carefully leaves So-hee asleep and gets ready for work, trying not to look at her for too long. She seems to him both beautiful and fragile, but he deliberately turns away, as if afraid to allow himself one more extra glance. The ringing of the phone brings him back to reality, and mechanically writing down the numbers in a notebook, he leaves without looking back. In the morning, So-hee wakes up alone and notices a pen and a note on her bedside table, which immediately raises alarm. After reading the short message with the date of the meeting, she feels everything inside her shrink, and tears fall on the paper. Several weeks pass, and So-hee walks down a long corridor, feeling dizzy and strangely weak. Messages from Ji-hoon are delayed, meetings are constantly being rescheduled, and documents that should have been ready long ago still haven't been submitted. She finds herself feeling irritated and tired, realizing that uncertainty is becoming the norm. Ji-hoon finally appears after a drawn-out meeting, and the tense politeness between them returns. The transfer of documents takes place in silence, and So-hee clearly understands that after this day their paths will finally diverge. Walking next to him, she feels unwell, heaviness in her body, and increasing nausea, attributing everything to fatigue and a disrupted routine. The thought of a possible cause comes suddenly and frighteningly, making the heart beat faster. The conversation about where they lived was dry and formal, emphasizing the distance that had grown between them. So he quickly says goodbye and leaves, leaving Ji-hoon behind as if closing the door for good. Left alone, she decides to go into the pharmacy, succumbing to a sudden impulse and an anxious premonition. Buying the test feels unreal, as if it's happening to someone else and not her. The result stuns her, and her first reaction is denial and an attempt to find a rational explanation. She convinces herself that everything could be a mistake, that she needs to check for sure, but the thought won't let go. The question, why now, sounds too loud as she places her hand on her stomach, not knowing whether to be happy or afraid. Meanwhile, Jihoon returns to the office and finds that his position has already been taken by a close acquaintance. The conversation quickly turns to the topic of divorce, and Jihoon is confronted with the question he's been carefully avoiding. He is reminded that even a marriage that began with convenience is never completely empty. Jihoon denies having feelings, but his words sound uncertain, as if he doesn't fully believe his own denial. It all ends with a sense of impending crisis, where past, present, and future begin to collide, leaving no room for calm. Soki sits alone in the hospital hallway, waiting her turn and replaying the events of the past week in her head, wondering if the line on the test could have been a mistake. Her thoughts are confused, fear and hope replace each other, and her hands tremble slightly, revealing the tension she is trying to hide. Her attention briefly latches to a pregnant woman nearby, her husband standing beside her, and the scene feels both warm and unattainable. When her name is finally called, Sohee jumps, as if returning to reality, and quickly stands up, afraid of being late. In the doctor's office, everything happens calmly and routinely, but the words of confirmation sound deafeningly clear to her. She learns that the period is already about 7 weeks, and at that moment, the realization completely covers her, displacing the last doubts. Along with the joy comes panic. Too much has happened at once, and the decision to break up with Ji-hyuk now seems even harder. The examination and initial recommendations are a blur, but looking at the image, Sohee feels for the first time that there really is someone alive inside her. As she leaves the hospital, she realizes that she is now responsible for more than just herself, and this thought is both frightening and empowering at the same time. She clearly understands that there is almost no support to be expected from anywhere, and telling Ji-hyuk will be difficult, if not impossible. The decision not to give up a child is born not as a loud promise, but as a quiet but firm feeling inside. On the way, the girl notices a small fruit stand and suddenly stops, as if something is drawing her towards it. Red apples evoke childhood memories of mothers and rare moments of warmth that remain forever etched in my memory. She remembers how she once got very scared, choking, and how she then saw a mother's tenderness that she rarely encountered anymore. These memories fill her with sadness, but also with a strange comfort, as if the past gently touches the present. As an adult, she had long since stopped reaching for apples, but now they seem especially attractive and necessary. Sohee finds herself thinking that perhaps the child inside her is giving her a sign, reminding her of life and continuation. While buying apples, she mentally promises herself to protect this little one, even if she has to cope with everything alone. The road continues, and her thoughts lead her to unfulfilled dreams, to the art that she once abandoned. She remembers an old friend with whom she studied and who has now become a famous artist abroad. The phone ringing abruptly breaks her out of her thoughts, returning her to work problems and a complex project. Sohee understands that she has too many unknowns ahead of her, both in her personal life and at work. A girl walks towards a man from her past, feeling how her life is gradually turning into a new, unpredictable direction. Soki sits in a cafe across from an old friend, feeling an unusual calm, as if a difficult decision has already been made and no longer requires justification, either to herself or to the past. She realizes that the divorce was not a collapse, but a quiet exit from a life where there was no warmth, and this understanding brings a strange, almost guilty relief. Her friend is shocked by her confession and notices how much she has changed over the years of separation, becoming more reserved, mature, and much less naive than before. For the first time, the girl allows herself to speak frankly, without making excuses, and notices that simply talking about the pain makes it less acute. The conversation inevitably turns to change, and Sohee finds herself choosing a cold drink, although before she only reached for warm ones, as if even her body had adapted to the new life. The coldness of the lemonade evokes in her vague associations with a marriage in which intimacy was formal and left behind only emptiness and detachment. Instinctively, she places her hand on her stomach, realizing that her body now lives for more than just her own sake, and this realization changes everything. So he suggests visiting a gallery connected to the past, feeling it's important for her to close one more unfinished chapter before moving on. In the gallery, memories wash over her like a wave. The paintings, the smells, the silence, everything reminds her of the time when she dreamed and believed that art would become her life. A friend notices the influence of her family, an unrealized talent in her work, as if the past is still reaching out to her, offering a second chance. Soki honestly admits to herself that she is no longer sure whether she will be able to return to painting, because the lost interest hurts more than the refusal itself. One painting particularly touches her, evoking a vague sense of lost promise and a question about a man who once held an important place in her life. A friend senses there's more to her decision to close the gallery than divorce and offers support, even without knowing the full truth. So he hesitates between wanting to tell everyone and being afraid to shift her burden onto someone else, realizing that she is used to coping alone. At the same time, a meeting begins in the city's business center, where the past and the present are imperceptibly approaching each other. Ji-hyuk appears at the negotiations as an influential person, outwardly confident and collected, as if personal changes had not affected him. The conversation suddenly turns to Soha, and her name sounds distant yet still significant, bringing up past connections. Ji-hyuk confidently leads the conference, maintaining complete control over the discussion, as if work is the only thing that allows him to maintain internal composure and not break down. Outside the hall, a far more fragile reality is unfolding, where fear, weakness, and possible pregnancy are intertwined with a desperate desire to keep a secret. The meeting ends seemingly perfectly. The project is approved, decisions are made, and the participants leave with a feeling of having successfully completed the task. Seongkwo's work forms the basis of the project, and Ji-hyuk emphasizes its significance, assessing not only its aesthetic value, but also its alignment with the corporate image. For Seonghwa, this painting is a trace of a difficult period in his life, and the recognition of its value becomes a symbol for him that the pain he experienced had meaning. The conversation about comfort and consolation unexpectedly touches Ji-hyuk, causing irritation, which he carefully hides behind restraint and a businesslike tone. His internal tension increases when an older relative, accustomed to authority in a familiar tone, approaches him. An attempt to get closer and remind him of family ties is met with a cold rebuff, in which Ji-hyuk clearly sets boundaries and demands formality. This behavior provokes whispers and discontent from those around him, who perceive his harshness as insolence and disregard for hierarchy. Several people are discussing the situation behind his back, believing that such a tone is unacceptable towards a person with such a status. The older man outwardly smooths over the conflict, explaining everything by his youth and hot temper, but inside, he feels a painful humiliation that presses like a heavy stone on his chest, forcing every breath to be tense and careful. Leaving the meeting place, he remains calm, but the irritation does not go away, but only accumulates, turning into a hidden resentment, growing with every memory of words and actions that hurt him more than he is willing to admit. Left alone, he replays the conversation in his head, feeling ever more clearly that his influence is gradually slipping away, like sand slipping through his fingers, and the power and respect he had become accustomed to are beginning to blur before his eyes. The idea that a new generation no longer respects his authority hits him harder than he cares to admit, causing both fear and bitterness as familiar landmarks crumble and leave a feeling of emptiness. Anger erupts in harsh thoughts, where Ji-hyuk appears as a spoiled heir who has forgotten his place, capable of making decisions without taking into account the experience of his elders, and this feeling of injustice hardens the heart even more. Gradually, emotions give way to cold calculation, and a decision arises not to leave the situation unanswered, as if an inner voice dictates the need for action, deliberate and precise, to restore balance and control. A phone call to the head of the family becomes the next step, carefully considered and devoid of chance, where every word is carefully weighed, and the intonation contains a hidden threat and a hint of future consequences. The conversation is subdued, but beneath the surface, calm lies the promise of pressure to come, like a calm wind before a storm, signaling that the game is just beginning and the stakes are high. A conflict that began with a formal refusal ultimately escalates into a hidden confrontation, where each side is already preparing for its next move, and strategies and options are carefully analyzed, like a chess game with an unpredictable outcome. Ji-hyuk sits at his desk and can't help but replay recent conversations in his head, especially the words of his friend So-hee, which unexpectedly cut deeper than he expected, causing a feeling of discomfort and uncertainty, as if the familiar order of the world had suddenly been shaken. His thoughts returned to the moment of the divorce, when So-hee entered his office and calmly put an end to it, leaving him in silence and inner numbness. He pretends that everything is under control, but his tired exhalation reveals a tension that does not let go even while sitting still, as if the weight of worries is pulling him down, and thoughts about the future and about Sohee are intertwined with a quiet anxiety, not giving him peace. An unexpected encounter with a colleague interrupts his train of thought and brings news that changes his expression in a second, as if reality had suddenly crashed down on him, leaving a slight tremor in his hands and a sense of urgency. Ji-hyuk learns that a gallery connected to Sohee's past is urgently put up for sale, as if she's rushing to erase another part of her life, and her colleague's words ring louder in her ears than she'd like, evoking feelings of anxiety and unexpected ownership. The information affects him more deeply than he is willing to admit, and an impulse arises within him to act, rather than simply watch from the sidelines. The desire to intervene and protect the past, which seemed to be already gone, becomes an almost physical sensation. A few days later, Sohee receives a call from a realtor and learns that an interested buyer has finally appeared, and her heart almost sank with excitement, because this decision could change her life and open a new page that she had long dreamed of. The news brings her cautious hope, because selling the building is a step toward financial and emotional independence for her, an opportunity to free herself from the heavy burden of the past and create a space where she can breathe deeply. She gets ready in a hurry and goes to the meeting, trying to convince herself that everything will go smoothly and without surprises, although an inner voice whispers that fate sometimes throws unexpected twists and tests determination and fortitude. Arriving early, Sohee spots a familiar black car, and a sense of foreboding instantly grips her chest, causing her heart to beat faster and her thoughts to vacillate between fear and a readiness to face what once seemed completely lost. Ji-hyuk steps out of the car. Reality hits harder than any words, shattering her expectations and plans, and the moment becomes almost tangible. The presence of her ex-husband hangs in the air, an inescapable reminder of the past. It turns out that he was the buyer, and this encounter seems too personal to be accidental, as if the world itself brought them together in this place to test the boundaries of previous feelings and unspoken words. Sohee feels awkward and vulnerable, clutching her bag as if trying to protect herself from the past that is standing before her again, causing mixed emotions, fear, irritation, and a slight sadness for lost moments. Ji-hyuk keeps a low profile, but his presence is oppressive, a reminder of the marriage that isn't yet legally consummated, of their time together, and how some bonds can't be completely severed instantly. They find themselves in a place connected to previous encounters, and this intensifies the feeling of strange, painful intimacy, where every detail of the interior and every sound evokes memories, as if everything around holds their past. Sohee catches herself in the familiar glances and gestures, immediately reproaching herself for weakness and memories, realizing that even trying to be strong, she still feels an emotional attachment that is difficult to ignore. The conversation takes a dangerous turn when Ji-hyuk hints at his recent visit to her and the fact that there is still a connection between them, and every sentence he says sounds like a test of her boundaries and an attempt to re-establish influence. Panic grips her, her body reacts with pain, and her thoughts become confused, because now at stake is not only the past, but also the secret that she carries within herself, and the feeling of responsibility for the child increases the internal stress. Ji-hyuk, not knowing the whole truth, continues to press, and the tension between them becomes almost unbearable, as if every look and word brings the moment closer when patience and control will be at their limit. A sense of impasse arises between the once lovers, where every next word could destroy the fragile balance, and Sohee understands that she must act carefully, maintaining dignity and control over the situation. Sohee is left alone with her disappointment and realizes that she urgently needs to go out and get herself together before her emotions get completely out of control and cause irreparable damage to her inner balance. In the restroom, she washes herself, trying to wash away the tears and thoughts of divorce, money, and that night that they seem to demand of her simply to cross out, feeling how each drop of water takes away some of the anxiety and tension. She's hurt by how easily Ji-hyuk suggests they forget everything, as if there was never any pain, intimacy, or responsibility between them. And it makes her hold on to her principles and emotions even tighter. She forces herself to accept that these are just residual feelings and decides to no longer hold on to a man who has already made his choice, letting go of the past for the sake of her own freedom and the future of her child. Returning to the hall, So-hee is met with a cold reception from the staff, who refuse her entry, citing rules and the status of guests, increasing her feelings of isolation and forcing her to mobilize her inner resolve. Her appearance becomes a source of ridicule and whispers, and humiliation quickly gives way to a flash of anger and resentment when she decides not to remain silent and to fight back against rudeness, maintaining her dignity. She does not hold back and openly points out rudeness, refusing to silently tolerate neglect, and her determination forces the staff to remain silent and the eyes of those around her to turn their attention back to the situation. Meanwhile, Ji-hook, remaining at the table, notices that So-hee has not returned for a long time, and anxiety begins to displace irritation because his memory returns to her pale face and weak state of health. He remembers her pale face and poor health, realizing that something could have gone wrong, and the internal discomfort makes him seriously think about the consequences of what happened. Sun-woo suddenly enters the conflict, stepping between So-hee and the staff, instantly changing the tone of the situation with an influence and determination that forces everyone to shut up and follow protocol. His name and status have an effect, and those who a minute ago allowed themselves to ridicule suddenly become polite. Feeling the power of his social position and the respect he has for him, Sun-woo takes So-hee aside, trying to avoid a scene and unnecessary attention, while simultaneously creating a safe space for her to recover and catch her breath. She is embarrassed but grateful for the support, and their short conversation brings back the feeling of human warmth and trust that she has long tried to maintain within herself. Ji-hook watches from the sidelines and is suddenly touched by how easily and genuinely So-hee smiles next to another man, causing a feeling of jealousy and a painful reminder of the past. He finds himself feeling jealous and irritated, remembering how reserved and subdued she was around him in their marriage, and how this freedom and ease now contrast with the time when their relationship was strained and complicated. When Sun-woo leaves, So-hee prepares to return to Ji-hook, realizing that a conversation is inevitable, and internally prepares for the meeting, gathering strength for an honest and calm dialogue. He intercepts her, his tone betraying resentment and possessiveness, as if he still has a right to her life, creating a tension that is hard to ignore and difficult to resist. So-hee abruptly sets a boundary, reminding them that there is nothing between them anymore, and demands that they stop interfering, declaring their right to personal space and independence. She leaves, seething with anger and misunderstanding, feeling how his contradictory actions are once again confusing her thoughts and causing an internal storm of emotions that she must cope with on her own. In the hallway, a sharp pain in her stomach suddenly hits her, forcing her to stop and literally slide down the wall, feeling that the situation is getting out of control and requires immediate intervention. Sun-woo, returning from a meeting, notices So-hee in poor condition and realizes that the matter is more serious than just a normal ailment, and that the child may be in danger if he does not act quickly. Fear is intensified by thoughts of possible consequences. So-hee is at a loss, not understanding what exactly is happening to her body, and internal horror overrides logical reasoning. A friend notices her condition and, pulling himself together, takes control of the situation, deciding to immediately take her to the hospital, realizing that every minute counts and delay is unacceptable. The road passes in heavy silence. So-hee trembles, pressing her hands to her stomach as if trying to protect the child from an unknown threat. Feeling how fear intertwines with pain and internal resistance, the doctor's office feels cold and alien. The anticipation of a diagnosis weighs more heavily than the pain itself, and every minute drags on painfully, causing the heart to beat faster and anxiety to grow. The examination is meticulous, and every movement the doctor makes So-hee freeze in anxious anticipation, feeling tension throughout her body, as if every touch could affect the child inside. Her thoughts take her to the worst-case scenarios, and her fear for her child becomes stronger than her fear for herself, creating an internal storm that is difficult to cope with without support and confidence. The examination results are favorable, no serious abnormalities are detected, and the pain is explained by natural changes, bringing long-awaited relief and a feeling of security. The knowledge that the child is okay brings Sohee great relief. The tension slowly leaves her body, and for the first time in a long time, she can breathe freely and feel peace. The sound of a heartbeat becomes a confirmation of life and hope for her, filling her heart with warm gratitude and the realization that it is still possible to preserve what is most precious. As Sohee leaves the office, she feels emotionally drained, but with it comes a sense of calm and quiet joy, mixed with a cautious pride in having overcome her fear and anxiety. Songwoo is waiting for her in the parking lot, hiding his excitement behind a reserved facade, but mentally prepared for the worst news, watching her every move and ready for immediate action. Sohee thanks him for his help, trying to keep her distance and not drag him into any possible consequences, while feeling how important it is to have support nearby in such moments. There is tension between them, connected with the past and the fear of public rumors that could destroy everything. But at the moment, it subsides slightly, giving way to a feeling of relief. Songwoo's mind wanders to how often the girl avoids him, and he internally notes how important it is to be there, even if only for moral support and protection from the unexpected. Somewhere far away, Soka's ex-husband has a dream in which distorted childhood memories and scenes of intimacy are intertwined with a sense of danger, causing internal discomfort and awakening old feelings. In these memoirs, a man and woman cross the line after their father's death, and a hidden observer becomes an unwitting witness, creating an atmosphere of anxiety and inner tension. A moment of passion is cut short by the sudden awareness of someone watching, and the situation takes a frightening turn, causing the heart to beat faster and the mind to search for ways to escape. A cruel impulse leads to a tragic outcome, leaving in the child's memory the image of a lifeless hanging hand, which is forever imprinted in the consciousness as a symbol of vulnerability and the unpredictability of life. Trying to retreat, the boy loses his balance, but someone's hands hold him, preventing him from escaping, creating a mixed feeling of relief and anxiety intertwined in one moment. The realization that the witness has been spotted becomes the final point of the chapter, leaving identities and motives in a frightening limbo, where the future seems shaky and unpredictable. Jihoon wakes up abruptly, realizing that the frightening scenes were just a nightmare, and for the first time in a long time, he feels fully conscious, assessing the boundaries of sleep and reality. He notices it is early morning and remembers that this day is connected with the anniversary of his father's death, which immediately explains the return of forgotten dreams and disturbing memories. Memories of past years come flooding back, as it was during this period that nightmares once haunted him almost every night, leaving him with an overwhelming sense of anxiety. The idea that what she saw in the dream could have been a reflection of childhood trauma associated with her mother and her new husband leaves a bitter aftertaste, mixing regret for the past. Jihoon tries to calm himself down by getting himself together, and in the silence of his home, he turns to prayer, seeking inner support and strength to cope with the memories and anxiety hanging over him. He cannot understand why the nightmares have returned now, because in recent years his life seemed stable and calm, and his inner balance a reliable shield. As he looks around the house, the man catches himself feeling as if Sohee is still nearby, as if her presence has imprinted itself on the space and left invisible traces in every corner. The realization comes painfully. It was after her departure that the emptiness became noticeable, and the nights became anxious and restless, creating the feeling that a part of life had gone with her. The big house feels cold and lifeless, and for the first time, Jihoon experiences how loneliness can be deafening, robbing him of his usual sense of security and peace. After some time, he finds himself at a meeting with the chairman, where the conversation begins calmly, with memories of the past and years gone by. The chairman shares his nostalgia for the times when fathers and sons were alive, young and happy, playing together without worries. The conversation gradually turns to company affairs, and Jihoon is entrusted with temporary management due to an urgent trip abroad. Responsibility falls on him unexpectedly, but he accepts it with restraint, Understanding the importance of trust. The topic of the anniversary of my father's death comes up, and the regret of the older generation fills the conversation with hidden guilt and sadness. The chairman mentions a strange but joyful dream involving Sohee and symbols of new life. This story leaves Jihoon feeling tense and confused, as he himself is unsure if there is any reason for hope. The conversation is interrupted by the appearance of another family member, whose attention to what is happening seems suspicious. Jihoon's departure, a hidden conflict, begins between the seniors regarding power and control over the company. One of them expresses doubts and dissatisfaction, clearly seeking to challenge the decision taken. It all ends with a heavy feeling of remorse, when the chairman is left alone with thoughts of past mistakes. President Hong is in Mumbai, where he is trying to vent his pent-up rage by acting rudely and destructively, as if punishing the world for his own humiliation. Thoughts return again and again to his brother, to the unfair words and orders that finally pushed him beyond the limits of power. He finds it absurd that all the years of dedication to the company were wiped out by one decision made without his participation. Irritation mixes with cold calculation when the call distracts him from his heavy thoughts. A conversation with a reporter confirms that the prepared material is ready for publication and can be used at any time. Hong decides to wait, enjoying the feeling of control, knowing that he now has a tool to put pressure on. He is confident that events will begin to develop strictly according to the intended scenario, and this thought brings him a grim satisfaction. Meanwhile, Sohee is at home, trying to calm down by rereading notes and looking at medical images. She remembers the fear she felt, thinking that something bad might happen to the child, and feels relieved. Despite her outward calm, she is still worried about the unexpected meeting that took place at the clinic. A memory comes to mind of the moment when she ran into old acquaintances, whose appearance caught her by surprise. She tried to behave naturally, hiding the truth and avoiding unnecessary questions. Congratulations and talk about the future child left her with mixed feelings, joy mixed with apprehension. After breaking up with the couple, Sohee convinces herself that nothing terrible happened and the secret will remain unsolved. In the office, Jihoon continues to replay in his head his grandfather's words about the strange dream that is haunting him. He dismisses thoughts about the possible meaning of the dream, considering such coincidences impossible. A working meeting with Director Han brings him back to the company's affairs and current projects. During the conversation, Jihoon notices his interlocutor's unusually elevated mood and learns about the upcoming addition to his family. The words of gratitude conveyed by Han's wife cause Jihoon confusion and internal tension. The mention of the clinic and a chance meeting with Sohee makes him wary, and for the first time begins to wonder about the reason for her visit to the doctor. Jihoon sits in the office, clutching a note with the clinic's address in his fingers, and stares at it for a long time, as if trying to find the answer to the question that has been bothering him since that day. His thoughts return to the fact that Sohee ended up in a hospital that is not connected to her usual routes or where she lives, and this discrepancy worries him more than any words. He runs through versions in his head, one more frightening than the other, trying to convince himself that it's not an illness, but the anxiety stubbornly grows, preventing him from concentrating on work. Sokha's words about there being nothing between them anymore come back to him, and it sounds like a clear line that he is not allowed to cross. Jihoon repeats to himself that he has no right to interfere in her life, even if the anxiety eats away at him from within and makes him doubt his own indifference. Finally, he leans back in his chair, closes his eyes, and forces himself to accept this, realizing that any action now would only be a violation of the promised distancing. Across town, in the office of a Parisian publishing house, Haewon works intently at her computer, oblivious to the time and completely immersed in her text. Her solitude is interrupted by an unexpected visit from an acquaintance who brings coffee and shows concern, noticing that she is again skipping lunch for work. Haewon tries to appear calm and engaged, emphasizing that she has long since learned to cope with the workload and does not consider it anything unusual. The conversation gradually shifts towards the past, reminding her of a difficult period associated with Jihoon, from which she supposedly has already been able to emotionally distance herself. When Jihoon and Sohee's divorce is mentioned, Haewon reacts sharply, trying to hide her shock and inner tension, which is only revealed by her clenched fingers. Her assurances that she has long since let go of her feelings sound more like an attempt to convince herself than a calm confession. Left alone, she walks down the street, biting her nails and turning over in her head what she heard, increasingly fearing that someone has begun to suspect her role in what is happening. Thoughts about the possible consequences force her to decide to act quickly and seek protection where she still has influence. That evening, Haewon shows up at President Hong's house, realizing that this is where he can find support and resources to solve the looming problem. She talks about the sudden visit to the office and the hints that directly link her name to Jihoon's divorce, causing her to fear being exposed. The main threat is the photographs, which can distort reality and present the situation as a betrayal that could destroy her career. Haewon admits that she is afraid of losing everything she has achieved over the years and begs him to get rid of the incriminating materials at any cost. President Hong appears calm and helpful, assuring her that he has a plan and that she should not worry anymore. Left alone, he looks at those very photographs, realizing that they could become not just trash, but weapons for a future attack. A calculated satisfaction is born in his thoughts, because these very pictures could become the starting point for Jihoon's destruction when the right moment comes. The door to the cafe opens, and Sunwoo immediately spots So-hee sitting at a table with a ball of yarn and knitting needles, immersed in a calm, almost domestic activity that contrasts sharply with her recent worries. So-hee looks collected and quietly focused, carefully putting her knitting away in her bag, as if it's not just a hobby, but a way to maintain balance and calm her thoughts. Songwoo notices that she knits with a special tenderness and gradually realizes that this is connected with the child, whom she already perceives as a separate, living part of her life. So he talks about the prenatal name she chose for her baby, imbuing it with warmth and hope, as if the name would protect both her and the baby from future difficulties. Sunwoo's reaction is filled with genuine approval, and his gaze reveals respect for the strength of a woman who is preparing to become a mother alone and still maintains a bright smile. The conversation gradually turns to matters related to the paintings and the building, and Senwoo announces that he has completed the transportation of the works, finally confirming his intention to buy the property. So he understands that selling is not easy, but she accepts the reality, realizing that the most important thing now is to provide stability for the child, even if it means saying goodbye to the past. A desire to help more than he allows himself to say flickers through Xianwu's mind, but he holds back, not wanting to push her or become an additional burden for her. So he admits that fear of the future exists, but the joy of expecting a child outweighs the worries, turning uncertainty into a quiet, almost tremulous happiness. Sunwoo is struck by her inner resilience, and he clearly understands that this is what makes her especially strong and attractive during this difficult period. Later, young woman planned meeting with Jihoon is there, and his presence instantly changes the atmosphere, bringing in attention that cannot be hidden behind an outward calm. So he notices him immediately, and the past seems to squeeze in her chest, although she tries to remain confident and not show how painful this moment is for her. Later, the girl recalls a recent call from the manager, who reported renewed interest in the building, and quickly realizes that Jihoon is behind it. The meeting is formal, without unnecessary emotion, and so he leads him inside, trying to keep her distance and not let old feelings break through to the surface. Jihoon's attention to the paintings, mentioning that one of them already has an owner, as if to emphasize the boundaries that can no longer be crossed. When the man brings up the topic of their past and that evening, So-hee abruptly cuts off his attempt at explanation, showing that this conversation no longer makes sense to her. Her words sound harsh, but they convey the weariness of a person who has carried someone else's guilt for too long and now wants to put an end to it. Soki steers the conversation towards business, confirming his agreement to sell the building and demonstrating his willingness to settle all outstanding issues at once. As a sign of the final break, she hands over the ring, symbolically returning everything that connected them before and freeing herself from emotional dependence. The farewell is cold and hard, and So-hee makes it clear that she no longer wants to cross paths with Jihoon, choosing a future without him. The breakup with Jihook happened casually and dryly, as if it was not the end of a marriage, but the completion of a long-expired contract, where emotions lost their meaning and only formalities remained. That day, they agreed never to cross paths again, and this decision became the final point after which their shared history was closed, with no right to random meetings or return. After the divorce, they saw each other only twice, once in court, pretending to have separated, and again during a real estate sale, where the conversations revolved around documents and deadlines. The meeting in Ji-hook's office to sign the papers was their last real dialogue as a married couple, cold and distant, with every word sounding like a formality. Financial matters were settled in advance, the money was to be received on time, and signatures were made without hesitation, as if there had never been any trust or closeness between them. A month passed, and life shifted to a work-oriented rhythm, where projects, alternative proposals, and professional decisions were discussed, completely displacing personal experiences. A tense argument erupts at a business meeting, the meaning of which remains behind the scenes, but the atmosphere makes it clear that a hidden conflict has arisen between key figures. After the meeting ends, several participants notice a strange tension between the chairman and the writer, discussing it in hushed tones and making guesses. Their conversation is interrupted by President Hong, who, watching from the sidelines, immediately understands the cause of the tension and decides to intervene, maintaining an outward appearance of goodwill. He recognizes the writer, recalling their past acquaintance, and invites him for coffee, offering to talk alone under the pretext of a friendly conversation. In the office, amid the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the conversation begins with polite phrases, but quickly turns to the past and the return to Korea after a long absence. The president carefully touches on the topic of Soka, recalling her wedding and intimacy with his interlocutor, as if casually checking how much he knows about what happened. The mention of divorce sounds cautious, but leaves a heavy aftertaste, raising old feelings that a man would prefer not to disturb. Hong speculates that Sohee may have been badly hurt and expresses relief at the thought that she may be holding up better than expected. The words about Ji-hyuk's guilt come as an unexpected blow, causing internal resistance and confusion, as if the truth is still hidden behind omissions. At this moment, the past washes over the man with a wave of memories, forcing him to abruptly interrupt the conversation and leave the office under the pretext of urgent business. He walks down the corridor, feeling how memories of his youth, drawings, and first steps in art are intertwined with the image of Soka. A scene flashes before his eyes where she joyfully runs up to him, full of energy and light, like the very embodiment of a carefree past. Other memories follow one another. Her smile, words of support, the promise of a happy life that then seemed sincere and possible. The realization of how far it has gone and how much remains unsaid overwhelms him with a heavy sense of loss, leaving the chapter open and unsettling. Sunwoo still vividly remembers the day of Sohee and Ji-hook's wedding, when at the altar, the child alternately cried and laughed, clapping his hands, as if he sensed the tension hidden from the adults behind the smiles and solemn music. Then Songwoo sincerely believed Sohee's words about future happiness, congratulated her without a shadow of a doubt, and even allowed himself to think that everything that was happening was truly the beginning of a calm and bright life. Only after some time did he begin to remember individual details: the tense pauses, Soka's overly reserved gaze, her cautious movements, as if she was constantly expecting something unpleasant even on her wedding day. Now, thinking back to those events, Songwoo understands that the image of a happy bride did not fit well with her inner isolation and almost imperceptible anxiety, which he chose not to notice at the time. The present brings him back to reality, and Songwoo realizes that he can no longer put it off. His last planned meeting with Sohee is becoming a necessity, not just a formality. All work is coming to an end, and even the secretary accompanying the chairman casually mentions that the moment of handing over the company to Ji-hook is almost already decided and does not leave any doubt. The chairman feels confident and calm, hoping to soon return to Korea and personally inform Ji-hook and Sohee that the business is completely in safe hands. At the same time, a close acquaintance arrives at Ji-hook's office, bringing with him a thick folder of documents related to real estate, bills, and the official registration of property rights. He carefully lays out the papers on the table, confirming that all legal matters have been settled, and that the property and jewelry are now finally assigned to Ji-hook. The acquaintance doesn't hide his surprise that Ji-hook went to such lengths for Sohee's sake, even though, from a practical standpoint, there was no longer any need for it. Ji-hook doesn't give a direct answer, silently studying the documents and only nodding, left alone with his thoughts after the office door closes. As he leaves the office, the acquaintance notes to himself that since the divorce, Ji-hook has looked tired and empty, as if the past still holds him too tightly. The phone rings unexpectedly, and the woman on the other end of the line cautiously asks about the meeting and how Ji-hook is taking the finality of the divorce. Having received confirmation, she draws conclusions faster than she allows herself to show, and ends the conversation in a polite tone, hiding her satisfaction. Left alone, she realizes that the long-awaited chance has finally arrived and begins to think about how to gradually take her place next to Ji-hyuk. In the evening, Ji-hyuk returns home, where he is met by Hae-won, demonstratively caring, as if she had prepared in advance to play the role of consolation and support. She hugs him without asking any questions, and an intimacy develops between them, built on touch and a silent agreement to forget, at least for a while. The intimacy remains beyond the scope of the details, but it is clear that at this moment, Ji-hook is letting events take their course, succumbing to initiative and fatigue. Hae-won takes his attention as a sign of victory, convincing herself that he now belongs only to her and no longer looks towards the past. But behind the outward calm, there remains a feeling that Ji-hook and So-hee's story is not yet completely over and will definitely make itself felt again. Hae-won wakes abruptly in her apartment and almost immediately realizes that her intimacy with Ji-hook was just a dream. The realization doesn't hurt. Instead, it leaves a strange warmth, as if memory itself had allowed her to briefly return to a place where everything was still alive. She lies there, staring at the ceiling, and catches herself smiling. Even the illusion was pleasant. The dream didn't destroy it, but rather seemed to confirm. Feelings don't disappear completely, even if the person is long gone from your life. The girl reaches for her phone and frowns in irritation. Ji-hyuk doesn't answer. The thought of inviting him out for lunch arises naturally, but is quickly drowned out by her to-do list and the reminder of her meeting later that day. Ji-hook's work mode kicks in instantly. Report after report, dry figures, clear formulations. He speaks calmly and confidently, as if his personal feelings are somewhere outside the room and have no right to intrude. The chairman listens attentively and confirms the plan without changes. The schedule is tight, time is short, but he sees no reason to postpone anything. The atmosphere becomes tense, but manageable as always. During the discussion, Hae-won suddenly notices that her secret lover's phone is nowhere to be found. The thought flashes through her mind and then vanishes. Meanwhile, Ji-hyuk is reviewing contracts in his office. His assistants are talking, and he nods, but his gaze remains heavy. Fatigue is mounting, and even his usual work no longer brings a sense of control. On the way to his next meeting, the driver gently suggests he take a break for at least a few minutes. Ji-hyuk waves him off, preferring to stick to his schedule, as if stopping might give his thoughts too much freedom. Several days pass before the schedule finally loosens. All current agenda items are closed in advance, and future meetings are deliberately postponed. This decision was made without his request, but perfectly timed. Ji-hyuk agrees to come home early and, for the first time in a long time, feels a sense of emptiness rather than a sense of urgency. In the quiet of the apartment, it becomes especially noticeable and unfamiliar. He opens the link sent almost automatically, expecting something trivial. Instead, the screen is filled with a video knitting tutorial. A calm voice explaining how to make a small sweater for a child. The voice sounds familiar. The camera turns off, and the woman wearily admits that filming is hard, and life is demanding more effort and money than expected. Ji-hyuk realizes it's So-hee. At that moment, he sees her not as the past or a mistake, but as a person who continues to move forward, even when she has to do everything alone and without anyone's support. Later, So-hee receives a call from her chairman and grandfather, Ji-hyuk. He expresses warm interest in her affairs and informs her that he will soon be returning to Korea, offering to have dinner with her now ex-husband. The girl freezes, realizing that the chairman still doesn't know about the divorce. This thought is alarming, but also a relief. It's becoming increasingly difficult to hide the truth. After a short pause, she decides she wants to tell everything herself. Not through rumors, not through casual words, but honestly and directly, even if it hurts. The chairman agrees to the meeting and wishes her good health. The conversation ends peacefully, but attention lingers within Soka, like anticipation of a thunderstorm. She puts her phone down and looks out the window, realizing that the past is catching up with her. She can't hide anymore, and sooner or later, all the unsaid things will come to light. On the other side of the city, Ji-hook was still thinking about that very video. The simple movements, the quiet voice, the childish thing in his hands, all of it somehow struck a chord deeper than any words. Each of them lives their own lives, pretending their paths have completely diverged. But a thin thread still stretches between them, invisible from the outside and therefore especially dangerous. In the morning, the secretary announces that the lawyer from the local team, Hye-sung, has already arrived. Ji-hyuk looks up from his paperwork and asks to be let in, feeling a strange tension, as if the conversation wasn't entirely businesslike. Hae-sung enters calmly, as always, greeting his friend and placing a folder of reports on the table. He says he's skimmed through the materials, but decided to deliver them personally since he was nearby anyway. Ji-hyuk is surprised and asks what made him come himself. Hye-sung explains that he has an outside meeting that afternoon, and it was on his way for no particular reason. There's a brief pause, and Ji-hyuk decides to ask the question that's been swirling around in his head since last night. He cautiously inquires about the video sent the day before. Hae-sung admits he stumbled upon it by accident while browsing YouTube recommendations. Hearing a familiar voice, he was stunned and forwarded the link almost immediately. He emphasizes that he didn't intend any hidden meaning, simply sharing his discovery. Having said this, Hae-sung turns to leave, not wanting to escalate the tension. Before leaving, he offers a gentle piece of advice. Don't dwell on it, and don't read too much into what you've seen. Work is more important, and coincidences can sometimes be empty. Left alone, Ji-hyuk sits motionless, staring at the table. That voice, calm and warm, comes back to him, and he realizes that for him, this is no longer just a coincidence. Later, Hye-sung parks near a familiar building where she visits every month for the same reason. Everything here seems unchanged, as if time is frozen. Thank him for his help and regular visits. He brushes them off, saying he's doing it of his own free will, and says goodbye until next month. Left alone, he reflects on the irony of his life. He once dreamed of escaping here forever, but now he returns again and again. His steps lead to an old playground. It was here, in the past, that he often looked for Hye-won when she hid and cried, missing her mother. An image of a little girl clenching her fists and sniffling comes to mind. He could do nothing but silently hug her. Those memories still tug at his heart. He promised himself then to protect her as much as he could, even if he was too young. Thoughts are interrupted by duty meetings, and he is called inside. President Hong greets Hae-sung warmly, inquires about his business, and invites him to sit down for a conversation. Hong cuts to the chase and mentions Ji-hook's recent divorce. He suggests that perhaps it's time to intervene and steer things differently. He hands Hye-sung the documents, calling them away to ensure Sae-won's happiness. His words convey not concern, but calculation. Hye-sung leafs through the papers and realizes that behind the elegant wording lies a clear plan. The day she first met Ji-hyuk comes flooding back. Then Ji-hyuk stood next to the chairman, withdrawn and tense, and Hye-won smiled so brightly that it seemed to illuminate everything around her. From then on, Hye-sung vowed to himself not to let her happiness be ruined by someone else's decisions again. He looks up and agrees to take action. The man sits in the room, slowly looking around the space, as if checking whether he is ready to make a decision that has already been formalized in documents and mentally signed by him in advance. He recalls his conversation with President Hong and realizes that he did not expect him to be so involved in Hae-won's fate, although he himself feels an almost familial responsibility towards her. The proposal is simple: do nothing for now and wait for the signal. When the time comes, he must help without asking unnecessary questions or hesitating, completely trusting the situation and his instincts, maintaining an inner calm despite the anxiety. For Hye-sung, this is natural. Hae-won is not just an acquaintance to him, but part of the family, and the thought that her happiness could be in danger haunts him, forcing him to think through possible options every minute in order to intervene in time and protect her from any troubles. His thoughts are interrupted by the voice of a girl who calls him not for the first time, surprised at how deeply he has withdrawn into himself and does not react to what is happening around him, as if he found himself in his own world, where only thoughts about the safety and well-being of loved ones are important. She gently reproaches him for thinking about work again, although he came to rest, and asks him at least today to be near her, not in thoughts, but in reality, emphasizing that attention to her now is more important than all the affairs and worries that have been piling up in recent days. Hye-sung apologizes and promises to take a break, trying to prove not with words but with actions that he is capable of leaving matters outside this room and that he can be here completely, giving attention only to those who are truly important at this moment, without the slightest distraction. The evening passes in intimacy and silence, where feelings are conveyed without unnecessary phrases, and the tension of the last days gradually dissolves, leaving behind warmth, trust, and the feeling that their connection is strengthened through silence, looks, and touches, and not through words. Later, alone, he looks at an old photograph on his phone of him and his sister as children standing next to their mother, and sighs heavily, feeling simultaneously nostalgia, sadness, and an understanding of how important it is to cherish family and remember that every minute spent with loved ones is priceless. This photo reminds him that family must be protected at any cost, even if it means taking difficult and controversial steps, making tough decisions, and sacrificing some of his comfort to protect loved ones from invisible threats and future difficulties. At the same time, Ji-hyuk sits at the bar, silently staring into a glass of alcohol, as if trying to drown in it the fatigue and thoughts that he cannot escape. Feeling both emptiness and heaviness after long days filled with tension and hidden pain from recent events, his friend suddenly approaches him, noting that he arrived early and asking with slight surprise what brought him here today, trying to lighten the atmosphere with a light, joking tone, but at the same time realizing that Ji-hyuk's mood is far from usual and requires a careful approach. Ji-hyuk answers evasively, explaining everything away as simple fatigue and a desire to drink after a stressful day, without going into details, trying to maintain an internal defense and not let anyone see how much the events of the past few weeks have affected him emotionally and left a mark on his soul. Hye-sung doesn't quite believe it, and carefully notes that everything is always written on his friend's face, even if he tries to look calm, pointing out that Ji-hyuk's inner experiences are visible to anyone close to him, and attempts to hide them only make the emotions more obvious to a careful eye. He says outright that those around him consider Ji-hyuk closed, but for close friends, his emotions are too obvious to go unnoticed, and that a mask of calm never hides true emotions, if a person is truly important to the one observing him. These words hurt the man, and he sharply denies that everything is already in the past, although he himself feels something painfully contracting inside, awakening old memories and nostalgia for lost moments that have not yet been released and require internal reconciliation. Hye-sung just shakes his head, noting that from the outside everything looks different, and that Ji-hyuk still hasn't let go of what was important to him, that the past has left an invisible imprint that prevents him from fully immersing himself in the present and taking steps toward new harmony. The conversation becomes tense, emotions break through, and Ji-hyuk can hardly contain his irritation, realizing that his friend hit the nail on the head, and that the truth about his inner experiences is too obvious to ignore or continue to hide behind a cold mask. After a pause, Hye-sung changes his tone and says that he hasn't come to lecture, but because he genuinely wants to help if possible, offering support without pressure and demonstrating that his goal is to ease his friend's burden, not to blame or lecture him. He invites Ji-hyuk to listen to his idea at least once, leaving the choice up to him. And there is a feeling in the air that this conversation could change a lot, opening up the possibility of a new perspective on the situation, and a way to resolve the internal conflicts that weigh on both of them. Hye-sung insists that he wants to hear the whole story, and it instantly shows on Ji-hyuk's face, as if the question has touched a nerve that has long been forbidden to touch, causing a storm of emotions hidden behind years of suppression, but ready to burst out. Ji-hyuk tries to cut the conversation short, insisting that it's pointless now, but his flash of anger betrays his fear that the past is not yet closed, and that any new words could destroy the fragile balance he's tried to maintain after the divorce and difficult decisions. A friend calmly points out the strange incompleteness of the situation, hinting that the breakup with the ex may be just a facade, with the legal and emotional nuances not yet resolved, leaving room for misunderstandings and potential changes in the future. Irritation turns to anxiety when Hye-sung reveals a legal detail that Ji-hyuk was unaware of, thinking everything had been decided long ago, and he realizes that his previous ideas about divorce were only superficial, and the current reality requires action and an understanding of the hidden nuances. It turns out that the marriage still formally exists because one required step was never taken. The realization hits him like a heavy wave, mixing anger, guilt, and the feeling that he was deprived of a choice, allowed time to pass him by. Hye-sung admits that he deliberately remained silent, afraid that Ji-hyuk would make a decision without sorting out his own feelings. The image of my ex comes to mind, her confusion and tired calm, which now seems familiar and unsettling. The friend hands over the flash drive with the documents and steps back, leaving Ji-hyuk alone with a choice that can no longer be postponed. Meanwhile, So-hee's friend makes a reservation at a restaurant in advance, deliberately choosing a place where they can talk quietly. It is he who invites her to dinner, masquerading as friendly concern and a desire to support her after a difficult period. At the table, he is attentive to details, as if trying to show the reliability and constancy that she so lacked. Gradually, the conversation moves away from neutral topics to the future, which he has already thought through and is ready to propose. He reports on the completed project and the decision to leave for the United States, emphasizing that this is a chance to start all over again. Then he directly invites her to go together, promising to take responsibility and not leave her alone. At the same time, Ji-hyuk is in the same cafe, feeling a sharp headache. He leaves the room, trying to collect his thoughts. Words about an unfinished marriage collide with the memory of how the ex asked them not to see each other anymore. Accidentally hearing a familiar voice behind the curtain, he stops, not understanding why his heart is constricting so sharply. Phrases about moving and caring reach him in fragments, until one unexpected detail tears the ground from under his feet and makes his heart stop. Words about pregnancy shatter his familiar picture of the world, and Ji-hyuk realizes that he didn't know everything about the past. The words about the child hit Ji-hyuk suddenly, as if the air had been knocked out of his chest, and he didn't immediately comprehend what he had heard, feeling how reality was cracking and losing its stability. While his mind is trying to catch up with what is happening, he hears Song-woo's voice, calm and confident, as if he had made a decision for everyone in advance and had no doubt that it was correct. Sun-woo talks about the challenges of single motherhood and emphasizes that So-hee doesn't have to go through this alone if she accepts his help. The proposal sounds like a well-thought-out plan. Moving to the United States, support, responsibility, and a willingness to formalize the family for the sake of the future child. Ji-hyuk doesn't understand when exactly all this happened, and whose child it is, feeling anxiety growing inside, mixed with confusion and jealousy. He freezes at the door, hesitating whether to enter or leave, and accidentally becomes a witness to an awkward moment that only increases his confusion. So he pulls away abruptly, making it clear that it wasn't the proposal that offended her, but the tone of the conversation itself, in which she heard not support but pity. She breaks down in emotions, and she admits that her greatest fear is being perceived as weak and dependent, rather than equal and independent. Sun-woo tries to justify himself, claiming that he spoke not out of pity, but out of a desire to be close to her and not lose her, even if it is selfish. The conversation ends, and So-hee leaves first, leaving Sun-woo alone with unspoken words and the feeling that he did everything wrong. She doesn't notice Ji-hyuk, who remains in the shadows of the hall, unable to find the strength to come out to her and ask questions, the answers to which are frightening. As So-hee walks down the street, she replays the conversation in her mind, realizing that Sun-woo's words had cut deeper than she was willing to admit. An unexpected call distracts her from her thoughts, and Chairman Hong's voice sounds warm and homely, as if nothing has changed. He announces his return to Korea and suggests meeting for lunch, unaware of how much unspoken truth lies behind her agreement. During the meeting, the chairman notices her fatigue and sickly appearance, showing genuine concern and offering to have her examined. So-hee waves her hand, insisting that everything is fine, although inside, she feels a growing fear that it is becoming increasingly difficult to hide the truth. The chairman invites her into the house, surrounding her with attention and warmth, and this only increases her feeling of guilt for her silence. She wonders when and how to tell Ji-hyuk about her divorce, knowing how painful the truth will be. At the house, they unexpectedly run into Haewon, and the tension between everyone is almost physically palpable. Haewon's gaze immediately falls on Sohee's ringless hand, and her smile reveals a hint of mockery that hides too much meaning. Haewon's awkward remark about Ji-hyuk not coming with Sohee comes across as a subtle mockery, and the girl immediately feels like they're trying to hurt her under the guise of a joke. Haewon pretends to be simply curious, but between the lines, doubts about Sohee and Ji-hyuk's closeness are clearly read, which makes the atmosphere at the table tense. The chairman doesn't immediately understand the subtext of the conversation, taking Haewon's words literally, which makes the situation even more awkward. Sohee calmly smooths over the situation, not wanting to turn the meeting into a conflict, and Haewon, having achieved her goal, heads back to the corporate dinner. Left alone, the chairman suggests going to the table and makes it clear that he has been waiting for this conversation for a long time without Ji-hyuk's presence. He clearly senses that the reason for the meeting is serious, and he watches Sohee closely, noticing her tension and suppressed anxiety. Gathering her strength, she decides to say the main thing and admits that her marriage with Ji-hyuk is over, and the divorce was finalized about a month ago. The news shocks the chairman. He sincerely does not understand how such an important decision could have been made without his knowledge. Sohee clarifies that she deliberately remained silent, considering it important to report everything personally, without intermediaries and rumors, so that everything would be honest and sincere. After the initial surge of emotion, the chairwoman gradually pulls herself together and begins to understand why she chose this particular moment. Then Sohee takes out a carefully prepared package from her bag, explaining that this is a way to repay the debt that has long lain on her heart. Inside is a bank card with money from the sale of family jewelry that Ji-hyuk bought from her at an inflated price. The chairman is even more astonished when he realizes that the jewelry was sold to Ji-hyuk as part of the divorce settlement, and realizes the gravity of the act. So he explains that she doesn't really consider these funds hers, and wants to return them to the one who once provided her with protection and a sense of family, showing respect and gratitude. He gently tries to refuse, explaining that it is Ji-hyuk's decision and money has nothing to do with it, but the girl firmly insists, showing firmness and sincerity at the same time. For her, this becomes the last and most sincere way to express gratitude for the years of care after her father's death, and for the fact that their destinies once intertwined, leaving a warm mark on her heart. Ultimately, the chairman accepts her decision, realizing that any refusal would only deepen her inner sense of guilt and the feeling of incompleteness with which she already lives after all the events she has experienced. He gently offers her something to eat, noting with concern that Sohee looks too pale and exhausted to have a calm conversation, as if her strength is leaving her faster than she can even realize it. While he talks about divorce, responsibility, and inevitable regret, the girl is suddenly overcome by a sharp weakness. There is a ringing in her ears. Her vision becomes cloudy, and reality seems to slowly slip out from under her feet, leaving only anxiety and cold. Sohee loses consciousness, barely managing to realize that the air seems to disappear, and her chest is squeezed by fear. Before darkness covers her, a desperate thought flashes in her mind. She cannot give up because there is life inside her that cannot be lost.